August 9th, 1935, 11:47 p.m. Dutch Schultz's car idled outside the Cotton Club with the engine running and three armed men in the back seat who'd already checked their weapons twice. Dutch's left hand gripped the door handle so tight his knuckles had gone white. His right hand kept moving to the .45 automatic on his hip, touching it, reassuring himself it was there. Through the club's front window, he could see Bumpy Johnson sitting at the bar, alone, drinking something dark. No bodyguards visible, no backup, just Bumpy and whatever he was thinking. The driver, a kid named Paulie, kept looking at Dutch in the rearview mirror with eyes that said we should leave, we should absolutely leave right now. Dutch had survived the first meeting with Bumpy 6 months ago by walking away when Bumpy told him to walk away. But tonight was different. Tonight Dutch had come with men and guns and the absolute certainty that he couldn't back down again without losing everything. He pushed the car door open and said to nobody in particular, 12 seconds. That's all I need. Was Dutch Schultz about to prove everyone wrong about Bumpy Johnson? Or was he about to become the story people told to explain why you don't get a second chance? The first time Dutch Schultz met Bumpy Johnson was in February 1935, and Dutch walked out alive because he'd had the sense to listen. Dutch was 42 years old, running the most profitable numbers racket in the Bronx, and he'd decided Harlem was next. Made sense on paper. Harlem's numbers operation pulled in millions annually, and the territory was fragmented between small operators. Dutch figured he could roll through with muscle and money, consolidate the whole operation under his control, and double his revenue inside a year. He'd done it in the Bronx, he'd done it in Newark. Harlem would be the same. Except Harlem had Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was 30 at the time, not yet the legend he'd become, but already respected enough that when Dutch sent his people into Harlem to start making offers to local numbers runners, Bumpy's name kept coming up as the problem. Dutch's collectors would approach someone, make their pitch, work for us or face consequences, and the person would say, "I need to talk to Bumpy first." After the third time this happened, Dutch decided to meet Bumpy himself. They met at a diner on 125th Street. Neutral ground. Dutch brought 2 bodyguards. Bumpy came alone, which should have been Dutch's first warning. A man who shows up alone to a meeting with someone who brings muscle is either stupid or confident. Bumpy wasn't stupid. Dutch made his offer. Bumpy could join the organization, run Harlem's numbers under Dutch's umbrella, take a percentage. Or Bumpy could refuse and Dutch would bring enough men and guns to take Harlem by force. Simple choice, smart choice. No reason for things to get messy. Bumpy had listened quietly, sipping coffee, letting Dutch finish his whole pitch. Then he'd said something that Dutch would repeat to people for months afterward. You can try to take Harlem. You'll fail, but you can try. Or you can leave Harlem alone and keep breathing. Your choice. Some people claim Bumpy made an explicit threat during that meeting, that he told Dutch exactly how he'd die if he pushed forward. Others say the threat was implied, that Bumpy's tone carried enough weight that Dutch understood without details. Either way, Dutch had walked out of that diner, gotten in his car, and told his people to leave Harlem alone. For 6 months, he'd honored that decision. But by August 1935, Dutch's patience had run out. Dutch Schultz came back to Harlem in August 1935 because he was desperate, and desperate men make fatal decisions. The problem was Thomas Dewey, special prosecutor, ambitious, relentless. Dewey had made his career going after organized crime, and by mid-1935 he'd set his sights on Dutch. Federal tax evasion charges were coming. Dewey had witnesses, bank records, enough evidence to put Dutch away for 20 years. Dutch needed money, serious money, to pay lawyers, bribe judges, and disappear if necessary. His Bronx operations were profitable, but not enough. He needed Harlem. So Dutch had convinced himself that the first meeting with Bumpy had been a fluke, that Bumpy had gotten lucky, that if Dutch came back with more men, better planning, and absolute commitment, he could take what he needed. Some historians argue Dutch was suffering from the same blindness that killed a lot of powerful men. He'd won so many times that he'd stopped believing he could lose. Others claim Dutch understood the risk but calculated that the alternative, prison or death from Dewey's prosecution, was worse than whatever Bumpy might do. Either way, on August 7th, Dutch held a meeting with his top lieutenants. He told them they were moving into Harlem, not asking, not negotiating, taking. He'd bring 15 men, hit 3 of Bumpy's biggest numbers operations simultaneously, and establish control before Bumpy could respond. Overwhelming force, quick execution, no room for Bumpy to organize resistance. His lieutenant, a man named Lulu Rosencrantz, had said what everyone was thinking. "Boss, Bumpy told you to stay out. You go back, he's gonna come for you." "Let him try," Dutch had replied. "I've got 15 guys with Thompsons. What's Bumpy got? Street loyalty? That doesn't stop bullets." What Dutch didn't know was that Bumpy had heard about the meeting within 6 hours. A waitress at the restaurant where Dutch's crew had gathered was dating one of Bumpy's numbers runners. She'd mentioned the conversation. The runner had told Bumpy, and Bumpy had started making phone calls. Before Dutch Schultz ever showed up at the Cotton Club on August 9th, Bumpy Johnson sent him a message that should have changed everything. On August 8th, Dutch's lieutenant Lulu Rosencrantz was walking to his car in the Bronx when a kid, maybe 14 years old, ran up and handed him an envelope. The kid said, "From Bumpy Johnson," and disappeared before Lulu could ask questions. Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper with a handwritten note. "You survived the first meeting because I let you. Don't come back." Lulu brought the note to Dutch immediately. They both stared at it, trying to decode the message. Was it a threat? A bluff? An invitation to negotiate? Dutch's people debated for an hour. Some said they should take the warning seriously. Others said it proved Bumpy was scared. Why send a note unless you were trying to avoid confrontation? Dutch sided with the second interpretation. He saw the note as evidence that Bumpy knew he couldn't win a direct fight, that the note was a last-ditch attempt to avoid the inevitable. "He's bluffing," Dutch told his crew. "If he had real power, he wouldn't need to send threatening letters, he'd just act." Here's where opinions diverge on what Bumpy was actually doing. Some historians argue the note was genuine warning, that Bumpy was giving Dutch one last chance to walk away because Bumpy preferred not to kill unless necessary. Others claim the note was psychological warfare, that Bumpy knew Dutch would interpret it as weakness, would come to Harlem feeling overconfident, and would walk into whatever Bumpy had planned. The evidence supports both readings, which might be intentional. Maybe Bumpy's genius was creating situations where his enemies' interpretations led them into traps regardless of which interpretation they chose. Dutch threw the note in the trash and finalized his plans. August 9th, midnight. 3 teams would hit 3 different numbers operations in Harlem simultaneously. Dutch himself would go to the Cotton Club, Bumpy's known hangout, and make it clear that the territory had changed hands. Show of force, demonstration of power, message sent, except Bumpy had sent his own message, and Dutch had missed it. Dutch Schultz pulled up to the Cotton Club at 11:47 p.m., with 3 armed men and absolute confidence he was about to win. Through the front window he could see Bumpy Johnson sitting at the bar, alone, no visible backup. Just Bumpy and a drink, like he was waiting for something. The club was busy, maybe 200 people inside, jazz band playing, couples dancing. Normal Friday night in Harlem. Dutch's driver, Paulie, said, "Boss, this feels wrong. Where's his people?" "Maybe they're smart enough to stay home," Dutch replied. But even as he said it, something bothered him. Bumpy Johnson sitting alone in a crowded club, visible through the window, making no effort to hide. Either he didn't know Dutch was coming, unlikely given the note he'd sent, or he wanted Dutch to see him. "You want us to come in with you?" asked Mickey, one of the three men in the back seat. "Stay in the car. Keep it running. I go in, I tell Bumpy how it is, I walk out. 12 seconds. Dutch checked his .45 one more time. "If I'm not out in 2 minutes, come get me." Dutch stepped out of the car. The August heat hit him immediately. Sticky, oppressive, the kind of heat that made everything feel slower. He walked toward the Cotton Club's entrance, hand on his weapon, eyes scanning for threats. Still nothing. Just the club, the music, Bumpy at the bar. He pushed through the door. The music got louder. Duke Ellington's orchestra. It don't mean a thing. People dancing, drinking, laughing. Nobody seemed to notice Dutch. Nobody seemed to care. He started walking toward the bar, toward Bumpy. That's when he saw them. Not bodyguards, not armed men, just people, regular people. But every single person between Dutch and that bar was watching him. The couple dancing near the entrance, the waiter carrying drinks, the woman sitting at a table by herself, the bartender polishing glasses, 20, 30 people, all with their eyes on Dutch Schultz, all silent despite the music, all waiting. Dutch stopped walking. Bumpy turned around on his bar stool, took a sip of his drink and looked at Dutch with an expression that wasn't angry or threatening. It was disappointed. Then Bumpy said 6 words that Dutch would hear in his nightmares for the next 2 months. "You should have stayed in the Bronx." What happened in the next 12 seconds depends on who's telling the story, but everyone agrees on how it ended. Dutch's hand moved to his .45, not pulling it, just touching it, reminding himself it was there. He opened his mouth to say something. Probably the speech he'd rehearsed about how Harlem belonged to him now, how Bumpy could work for him or die. He didn't get 3 words out. The bartender moved first. He set down the glass he was polishing and pulled a shotgun from behind the bar. Not pointing it at Dutch, just holding it, visible, present. Then the waiter near Dutch's left reached into his jacket. The woman at the table stood up and Dutch saw the outline of a weapon under her dress. The couple who'd been dancing separated, and both of them turned to face Dutch with their hands moving to their waistbands. In less than 5 seconds, Dutch counted 12 weapons. 12 regular people who'd been drinking and dancing and now were armed and focused entirely on him. And all of them were between Dutch and the exit. Bumpy hadn't moved. He was still sitting at the bar, still holding his drink, watching Dutch process what was happening. Then Bumpy spoke again, his voice casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "You brought 3 men. I brought 200. You want to start this now or you want to walk away?" Some people claim Dutch pulled his weapon at that moment, that he actually drew the .45 and aimed it at Bumpy before realizing how badly he'd miscalculated. Others say Dutch never touched the gun, that he understood immediately he was surrounded and outmatched. The truth is probably somewhere between. Dutch's hand moved toward his weapon, but he stopped when he realized that pulling it would mean dying right there on the Cotton Club floor. The 12 seconds ended when Dutch took a step backward toward the door. "Smart choice," Bumpy said. He turned back to his drink. "Now leave. And don't come back to Harlem, not tonight, not ever." Dutch took another step back, then another. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody lowered their weapons. They just watched as Dutch Schultz, one of the most powerful gangsters in New York, backed out of a Harlem jazz club because he'd finally understood what everyone had been trying to tell him. You don't win fights in neighborhoods where everyone's already chosen a side and the side isn't yours. Dutch got back in the Packard and Paulie said, "Boss, you okay? You're white as a sheet." Dutch didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the Cotton Club, watching through the window as Bumpy Johnson turned back to the bar and ordered another drink like nothing had happened. The weapons had disappeared. People were dancing again. The waiter was serving drinks. Everything looked normal. "Drive," Dutch said quietly. "Where?" "Anywhere, just drive." They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Mickey in the back seat asked the question everyone was thinking. "What happened in there?" Dutch told them. About the weapons, about the people, about Bumpy's calm voice offering him the choice to walk away. By the time he finished, Lulu was shaking his head. "We should hit them tonight," Lulu said. "Bring everyone, show them we're not scared." "No," Dutch said, and his tone made it clear the discussion was over. "We're done with Harlem." "But boss, we're done," Dutch repeated. "Bumpy was right. I should have stayed in the Bronx." Here's what's interesting about Dutch's decision. He never told his crew the full truth about what scared him at the Cotton Club. It wasn't the weapons. It wasn't the numbers. It was the coordination. 12 people had armed themselves and positioned themselves perfectly within seconds of Dutch walking through the door. No shouting, no confusion. Just instant, silent organization. That level of coordination meant Bumpy hadn't just prepared for Dutch's arrival. He'd prepared everyone in that club, had drilled them, had turned 200 civilians into a defensive army without Dutch even knowing they existed. Some historians argue this proves Bumpy had an almost supernatural level of control over Harlem, that he could mobilize entire communities with a phone call. Others say it's simpler. Bumpy had told people Dutch might show up, had asked them to be ready if he did, and the community had responded because they trusted Bumpy more than they feared Dutch. Either interpretation is impressive. Both suggest Dutch was right to walk away. By noon the next day, every gangster from Boston to Philadelphia had heard some version of what happened at the Cotton Club. The story evolved in the telling. Some versions claimed Dutch had pulled his gun and Bumpy had disarmed him personally. Some said there were 50 weapons, 100 weapons, everyone in the club. Some said Bumpy had threatened Dutch's family. The details varied, but the core message stayed consistent. Dutch Schultz had tried to take Harlem twice. The first time, Bumpy had warned him away. The second time, Bumpy had surrounded him with an army and dared him to start shooting. Dutch never publicly acknowledged what happened. When people asked, he changed the subject. But his actions spoke clearly enough. He pulled all his people out of Harlem permanently. Canceled the planned raids, stopped talking about expansion. His Bronx operations continued as before, but he never crossed into Harlem again. 2 months later, in October 1935, Dutch Schultz was shot at the Palace Chop House in Newark. Not by Bumpy, by Charles Lucky Luciano's people, who decided Dutch was too unstable, too much heat from the feds, too dangerous to keep around. Dutch died the next day, and his last words, recorded by police, were famously incoherent. Fever dreams, nonsense. But some people who were close to Dutch claim he mentioned Harlem in those final hours. Kept saying something about should have listened and the man at the bar. Maybe he was thinking about Bumpy. Maybe he was just delirious. Either way, Dutch Schultz's story ended without him ever figuring out how to beat Bumpy Johnson. The story of August 9th, 1935 became legend not because of what Bumpy did, but because of what he revealed about how power actually works. Dutch Schultz had men, money, and weapons. He had a reputation built on violence and intimidation. He'd taken territory from people who didn't want to give it up. By every conventional measure, he should have been able to take Harlem. But conventional measures missed the critical factor: community. Bumpy hadn't built his power through fear alone. He'd built it by being useful to people, by solving problems the police wouldn't solve, by paying rent when people couldn't, by protecting businesses from outside predators. When Dutch came to Harlem, he wasn't just fighting Bumpy. He was fighting everyone who'd benefited from Bumpy being there. Everyone who understood that Bumpy leaving meant someone worse taking his place. Some historians argue this romanticizes Bumpy's rule, that he was still a criminal, still violent when necessary, still running illegal operations. They're not wrong, but the Cotton Club incident suggests Bumpy understood something most gangsters missed. The most sustainable power comes from making enough people believe they're better off with you than without you. Dutch couldn't beat that with guns. The 12 seconds at the Cotton Club weren't about Bumpy being faster or tougher or more ruthless than Dutch. They were about Bumpy having already won before Dutch walked through the door. The moment Dutch decided to ignore the warning note, the moment he convinced himself Bumpy was bluffing, he'd lost. The Cotton Club just made it visible. Here's what keeps bothering me. What if Dutch had taken the warning seriously? What if he'd read Bumpy's note and decided the risk wasn't worth it? What if he'd stayed in the Bronx focused on his legal problems, never gone to the Cotton Club? He'd still have died in Newark 2 months later. Lucky Luciano's decision had nothing to do with Harlem, but he wouldn't have died knowing he'd backed down twice from the same man. Maybe that's the real tragedy. Dutch was fighting 2 battles, one against federal prosecution, one against his own ego. He could have won neither, but he didn't need to lose both. The Cotton Club was optional. He chose to go there, chose to test Bumpy again, chose to believe that overwhelming force would overcome community preparation. And maybe that's what the story is really about. Not Bumpy's victory, but Dutch's inability to accept that some territories aren't worth taking. That some opponents can't be beaten with conventional tactics. That sometimes the smartest move is walking away. Dutch survived Bumpy Johnson once by listening. He died, at least symbolically, by not listening the second time. The 12 seconds at the Cotton Club didn't kill Dutch Schultz, but they showed him a truth he couldn't accept. He wasn't as powerful as he thought, and Harlem was never his to take.